Hello. So, this doesn't look like the Buddha. This looks like it looks like Jesus, right? So, what's up with that? Video's called, what do they call it? How to Enter the Realms of the Buddha. We're starting off with a picture of Jesus. They're not really related, so I'll just cut to the chase here. Hold on a second. Let me just move over. Boink. Okay, am I live here? I think I'm live. Um, anyway, um, let me just make sure that I know what I'm doing. Hold on a second. Just want to make sure that I'm actually online here. I'm online. There we go. Sure that I know what I'm doing. Nice. Got it. Yeah, so I guess I'm going to talk about a couple of things. This entering the realms of the Buddha. What I was going to call this video was I was going to call it the spherical concentric spherical meditation, but that doesn't really connect. What does that even mean? Right? It doesn't mean anything. And as a result of this, you can enter into the Buddha realms, apparently. So I mean, the thing is, who knows how relevant this will be for a lot of people? Because it seems like you've got to do a lot of work or something first. I don't know, but I'll explain the technique and try and stick with that. I'll get back to the Jesus thing in a jiffy. Like once I explain the technique, I'll get back to that, I guess. Oh, Vegan Dolls, what's up? Pastor Scott. You got it, Vegan Dolls. Um, yeah, so what am I saying here? So on the community pages, for some time now, I've been talking about this thing that I call the dangerous kriya. Now, the dangerous kriya came from a guy called Forest Nutson. Forest Nutson. He's a guy who's I think he was in India for a long time and he worked in the school of Yogananda. And he's a really upbeat guy, who's got a lot who's teaching various lessons on how to meditate on his YouTube page. And he seems authentic. It's not going to devolve into anything sexy at all, I'm afraid. It might, but not really, right? Um, anyway, he's got this page, and if I seem like I'm a little off basis, because sometimes people comment, and you feel like you've got to respond sometimes, right? Anyway, um, so Forrest has this meditation, which I don't think he actually teaches as a meditation. He discusses it, and he calls it the dangerous kriya. Now, as I was listening to him, what was interesting about it was like I've read some of the Yogananda books. Like there's like 2,000 pages of meditations, which are their kriya yoga book, and magnesium. And they seem interesting, but after listening to Forrest Nitson, it was pretty obvious that what he was actually talking about was moving energy through the body, right? And so the dangerous kriya essentially is visualizing energy from the third eye, going through the center of the head, coming out the back of the head, onto the crown chakra, back down, and then through the head. Rinse and repeat. So that's the dangerous kriya, which, doesn't sound like a big deal. However, many people, including people like Franz Bardon, have cautioned against visualizing light inside of your head because it can lead to instability, right? Mental instability, literal instability, various things like this. So, like for example, Bardon has in his practice when they're doing visualizations, he actually has a visualization where you protect the heart and you protect the head, and that's what you do. However, ever since I read that with the dangerous kriya, because some people do the dangerous kriya, so the moment I read it, I was like, okay, I'm doing this, man. I got to do the dangerous kriya, right? So got to give it a try because I've obviously got a lot of experience with energy and stuff these days. So I thought, let's give this a try, and so I was doing it. I've been doing it for several months, like every day, and it feels good. I mean, it feels as good as any other energy process. But there's something interesting that happens, and one of the things is like there's a lot of talk. Like for example, I was speaking to somebody recently who had recommended to me again to reread the book called The Presence Process. Right now, The Presence Process is a book. I can't remember the author's name, but it was one that Krister recommended that I read. Krister's the guy who does the RASA transmissions. And so I read it back then, and it's kind of like a programmed, it's a programmed way, down to earth way of awakening is what it is, essentially. And one of the interesting things, because I'm just listening to it again now, right? I'm running it on an audiobook format, text to speech. And one of the things I noticed in the book that he was talking about meditating, but maintaining the meditation on the body. And one of the reasons you want to stay meditating on the body is because the body is the body is in the now. The body lives in present time awareness, whereas the mind doesn't. The mind's in the future and the past. The body is always in the present because it has to, right? So the heart's in the present, the mind's the brain is in the present, but the actual thought process clearly is not in the present. But by meditating on the body, that has a tendency to pull you into present moment awareness, what some people call awakening, or what other people call enlightenment, right? So there's a couple of things going on at the same time here. So that's one thing, right? The other thing that's going on is I've been working with Tomer. Tomer is the guy I did a video with Tomer a few months ago. I'd done his astral projection class and had some success. But it turns out that Tomer's he's a real tantra teacher. And so we chatted a little bit, and he gave me a mantra, and the mantra was really powerful. And then he asked, he was talking about maybe initiating in Sri Vidya Tantra, and I said I would like to do that, but there's kind of a process before you actually get initiated. So I'm like, cool. So I got another mantra, which I've been working on a lot. It was difficult to learn the other mantra. I haven't really told people the other mantra, but he never actually specifically said, don't tell people the mantra. But what's interesting with this other mantra is because he said to me, he's like, what kind of mantra do you want? And I said, listen, just something for spiritual protection. For obvious reasons, if you've watched his channel for any length of time, right? Spiritual protection, please, right? So that was kind of cool. So I've been doing this mantra, but what's really interesting about this mantra, and I've spoken about this in the community a little bit, like maybe more in the member section, I'm not sure, but like what the mantras had surprising outputs. So if you get a mantra for spiritual protection, what you might think is going to happen is like a little guy is going to show up on your shoulder and like ward off evil, or the Archangel Michael's going to show up and ward off evil or something, right? Or whatever, right? Spiritual protection, man, or a shield of white light is going to surround you. So that's not what happened with the mantra. What happened with the mantra is the mantra redirected me to myself. And part of that was, and I'm gonna say this. I mean, who knows causality or whatever? But part of that was bumping into somebody online who is helping people with specific meditations, and he happened to mention the presence process, and I was like, dude, that's really that's weird, because I was really connecting with his lecture, and then like he mentioned the presence process, and I thought, dude, I'm going to get in touch with this guy. And sometimes like when you have an intention, and I didn't connect this to the mantra at all. It just like was just something that was happening, and so So I contacted the guy and we had a chat. And in that moment, I'm not sure if it happened when we chatted or just after we chatted. It might have been just after we chatted. I don't know what happened, but it was around that same time that I suddenly became aware. Because this guy was also talking. He was talking about the presence process, and he was talking about the trauma of the inner child, which which was something that was really interesting to me. Cool. It was something that was really interesting to me. Because this is when I was working with Hilmar, who I've also done an interview with on the main page here. Hilmar was going on and on about the inner child, right? So when I was talking to Hilmar, like 4 or 5 years ago, I was doing uh, deeply sexy meditations, right? And they weren't really sexy, but it was using that energy to focus consciousness. Is what it was. But it was dangerous because it was evoking spirits of a negative quality. And so when I spoke to Hilmar a few years ago, he had a few recommendations for me, you know. And Hilmar's like a just down to earth guy, He's really funny, man. He's like a laugh. We talk quite a bit, and he just cracks me up. But he had some good meditation advice, and one of them was don't do those meditations anymore, which was difficult to quit. But I adjusted it, right? And then the other one was, get in touch with the inner child. And then he has a process which he does, which is like a 12-step process, which is associated typically with Alcoholics Anonymous and all this stuff, right? And I was like, okay, I'll go along with that. Now, he isn't doing it for alcoholics. He's doing it as a way of awakening, right? So apparently the lessons of the 12 steps is actually a sort of programmed way of awakening. Because apparently what happens is if you have addictions, conscious awareness is really the only way to truly break an addiction, right? Apparently, right? So that was an interesting thing that Hilmar had brought up. And so it was interesting. This other guy was talking about the same thing. And so that was funny. Anyway, we had a chat, and like I got off the chat, and I'm just like this inner child stuff, and I don't know what happened. It just clicked. It just friggin' clicked. I had a moment of complete awareness of the inner child slash pain body, whatever you want to call it. The inner child and the pain body are basically the same thing. I mean, you might think of the inner child as a subset of the pain body, but I mean, more or less, yeah. I think pain body is the word you use for people who feel a bit silly saying the inner child, but the inner child is probably a more descriptive phrase. It's probably a more accurate way of describing what's happening. So, so it wasn't just like a moment that clicked. It was like a transcendental moment where it just became obvious. Uh, it was a revelation. Let's just call it a revelation. It was a profound revelation of consciousness. And this is interesting because the presence process books talked about this too. And Hilmar was talking about it. This other guy's talking about it. And all of a sudden, it just came into focus. It just came into focus that So what it turns out is that the inner child basically completely rules your life. Like I think for most people, probably for a lot of people, because now that I'm aware of it, because I've meditated into the inner child structure, but there's a difference between that structure, like on an astral level, and then like the conscious awareness of it in real life. And because that's what's happened, is this conscious awareness in real life is staggering. It's staggering the power it's got. Well, Scott, I'm clearly not talking about entering the Buddha realms here, right? But I'm getting there. One of the things Hilmar spoke about back in the day was he was saying, like, listen, he's like, once you deal with this inner child stuff, you gain access to all kinds of different realms and whatnot, And I was like, dude, I already have access to lots of realms, I don't have any problems with realms, right? But it does appear to have some massive impact. You see, what happens with the inner child is the inner child is basically, and this is a generalization, but it's basically trauma. Like, and I think it takes on different disguises, but in my case, it's trauma disguised as pleasure, right? So what happens is whenever you feel this discomfort, you kind of like self-medicate, right? So you grab some beer or some drugs or whatever, right? So it's like you, instead of dealing with the underlying trauma, which may be a small, insignificant trauma, but whatever it is, it gets dressed up as something else. And that is what an addiction can turn out to be. And it sort of self-perpetuates, right? So you don't deal with the underlying trauma. And so the idea is that what you do is you just once you become conscious of it, you can create space around this trauma, and it's cool. Now, what's interesting about this is because the trauma and pleasure are sort of co-participants in some kind of secret, because it's hiding it's hiding some pain, which you don't even know is there. Then what happens is that relationship creates like a bond, like a glue between, it basically creates identity. It creates a false identity. And what is false identity if it's not the ego? So what happens is when you break the bonds of the inner child, or when you don't break the bonds of the inner child. What you do is you start illuminating with consciousness this space which has been extremely contracted and glued together. Oh, there's what happens is once you separate the consciousness of this stuff, right? It also what's the word? It sort of breaks the glue of identity in some ways. Now, I see that Vegan Dolls down here is saying that you can't ever break that, or you can't get rid of it. And that seems like it's true also. You know, I mean, most of the people I've spoken to are like, well, it's always there, but the thing is you come to what you have to do is you become conscious, and the consciousness releases a lot of the energy. And the big thing with this, of course, is it's this connection with a false identity which gets broken. And once you break the connection to false identity, that connection with false identity is literally like the tether of a balloon. Like if you got like one of those big balloons which want to go up into the sky, but you get it tethered to the ground, right? It's not going anywhere. It's tethered. Those tethers could be considered the sort of false relationship, the false identity created with this disguise, the pleasure, the trauma disguises pleasure or anger or whatever it is. I think lots of people have different disguises, and this is becoming really apparent all the time. Still not the Buddha realms yet. Sorry about that. Anyway, I'm getting there. Anyway, this is like a big revelation. It's not just what's interesting about this is not an intellectual revelation. It's like a profound, like experiential, like moment, which I'm very grateful to have had. It's cool. It's cool. Now, what's really interesting about this is it seems to, as Hilmar predicted, it seems to have opened up all kinds of access to other realms. And that's cool. So I've got this new mantra I've been working on, right? The mantra for spiritual protection. So the mantra for spiritual protection seems to have guided me not to some kind of little spiritual guy who pops up on your shoulder and helps you out. It's pointing me back to myself, as if that was the source of where all the problems were coming from. And yeah. And so there was some pretty sort of interesting moments there. So it seems like the demonic I'm not. I don't, this might not be 100% sure, but it seems like at least 90% of the demonic is emerging from the tension of those two forces. And so the demonic, I don't know where that's, the demonic is, I don't know how to describe it. I know what I'm trying to say here, but it's almost like it may actually be emerging from the inner child, um, kind of a thing. Anyway, the interesting thing about this is I started this video off with an image of Jesus, right? And so what was interesting about the image of Jesus is once I had this realization, I thought, I should get in touch with Hilmar again. I haven't spoken to him in a month or so. I thought, I was like, dude, so I got into him. I was like, dude, you're right about this whole inner child thing. I'm like, holy shit, you know? And so he was talking. He's like, well, he's like, and this is part of his main, this is his main teaching, I guess. Hilmar's teaching is about the inner child and coming to terms with the inner child, which seems like is actually a pretty good place to be. The whole inner child teaching. Um, it's sort of a more fundamental idea. You see, I've sort of been trying to teach people about energy and all this sort of advanced tech for moving into higher states of consciousness. But the cool thing with the inner child stuff is it's very down to earth kind of a thing. It's a very down to earth teaching because it's sort of founded. It's something you can sort of grasp in the real world. Like if I tell people about how to uh, use a chakra, how to move energy in specific ways around a chakra. If you don't know how to do that, or if you haven't felt it, it sounds sort of like just like it's imaginative bullshit, right? Because you haven't had the experience. It's not bullshit, but it's whereas with the inner child stuff, it's very factable. Like so these emotions, it's sort of based on emotions and feelings, and it's like okay, it's more approachable, but it may have greater outputs than this what it appears like. Like so, dealing with sort of the basic, like your basic problems, actually has massive spiritual outputs, which were unexpected. Um, Unexpected output, just unexpected flow. So anyway, I was talking to Hilmar, and he was pointing out that look, he was like, look at this picture of Jesus, and that picture of Jesus, which I put on. Let me just move over there again. Hold on a second. Do I have? There we go. Hold on. I'm using this OBS program, which lets me switch frames. There we go. Um, so if we look at the Jesus picture again, what the Jesus picture, or what Hilmar was saying, is he was saying like these are both Christ, is what he was saying. I don't know if that's particularly true, but let's pretend this is true, right? That these are both Christ, these are both Jesus. One's the baby Jesus, one's the adult Jesus. Could be. And so what Hilmar was saying was that the baby Jesus is actually a symbol for the inner child. And the adult Jesus is he's actually like the steward. He's like the steward's the word, or he's like the responsible adult who's learned how to care for the inner child. And because he's done that, the inner child has his hand on the globe of gold, right? It's changed the quality of the world from earth into gold. And Hilmar was saying that's actually the spiritual significance. And I was like, that seems like a really good way to think about it, right? Seems like a really good way to think about it for me, and I'm I'm cool with that. Seems pretty reasonable. Um, Pretty reasonable. Where am I here? I got like 6 windows open. So this whole thing about confronting these inner traumas, and it's funny because I don't feel that traumatized, but a lot of people don't feel traumatized. But what you got to think about is it's not you who's traumatized. It's this inner child. And the thing is you think about the inner child, it seems like some distant energy, like from the past, but the inner child is actually, it's a living energy in this moment, right? It's right here. You just are ignoring it, right? And the way you ignore it is by covering it up with other behaviors. Anyway, so that's, I reckon I've been brought to this by the spiritual protection mantra from Sri Vidya, which, yeah, it's changed my perception about clearly the demonic amongst other things, which is a big theme in this channel. You know, because I've obviously gone through a lot of like demonic interaction over the years, right? So this is kind of like a paradigm shattering knowledge and really liberating, because then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, because it's like now if there's demonic evocations, it's kind of like, well, wait, this is coming from me potentially, which I never really, I mean, people have said this kind of thing, but like to actually locate it in consciousness, that's pretty powerful. Anyway, meanwhile, I've been using the spiritual protection mantra, and it's quite a difficult mantra to repeat. This, like all the syllables, I can do it now, kind of. Can I do it? I'm not sure if I'm allowed to like repeat it. I don't think, I wasn't told not to. Yeah, so it goes like this. It goes Hrim Pakshirovai Vidmahe Sharavheshvarai Dimahi Tano Rudraha Prakshodiyat. That's the mantra. It took me so long to memorize that. And even now, before I go into meditation, I have to recite it a couple times just to get all the syllables in place. Anyway, so I'm doing this recitation of the mantra. And, but I'm also, for all these years, my meditation is basically based on the body, right? It's moving consciousness around the body. And then a lot of times it moves into other dimensions and into like wherever it goes, right? Or evocation or whatever. So now so I've been doing that with the mantra because the mantra was difficult. I found that my mind was wandering because the syllables were difficult to say. So I was trying to think of like, how can I keep my mind focused, you know? So that, well, what I'll do is I'll move the mantra around my body, right? And that seems like a good idea because in Sri Vidya, in that tantric practice, they have a thing called nyasa where you sing mantras into different body parts, right? It's not this particular mantra, but that's kind of done for spiritual protection. So I kind of just crossed a sort of like a metaphorical bridge and said, you know, I'm going to do that, and that's fine. So I started singing the mantra and doing it around my body in different places, right? And so I was doing that, and it really helped. I started being able to get the rhythm and the pronunciation and the memorization going, and it was working. So I've been using this, and plus I like the idea of dropping this mantra around these different sort of conscious focuses in the body. You know, it just feels right to me. And a lot of this stuff is kind of done with intuition. And a lot of times the meditational practices I do tend not to, sometimes to come from books, but it tends to come from intuition. A lot of times it comes from like something I've read, but then as you're doing it, you'll get an idea about the correct way to do this, and you'll do that. So another way of doing this is you can move your awareness around your body. So I've talked about this over the years, like you focus your awareness in your hand or in your finger, then this finger. So if you look up these Nidra yoga, there's some really good Nidra yoga on YouTube. And so you can just, you think about the tip of your finger, then this knuckle, then this knuckle. And it seems really boring, but if you can feel energy, it's just like this ecstatic. It's just so good, man. Oh my God. You can just sit there for hours just feeling awareness at the tip of your finger. It's just crazy. There's lots of different ways of doing this. So if you read up on like Vipassana meditation and other types of meditation, like one of the things you do in Vipassana, they can move awareness around the body, but then it'll also like move it Like other levels of Vipassana, you'll start thinking about like the skin and then the bones, and you'll identify the bones as like the earth element and the blood is the water element, and it becomes metaphoric, right? So what happens is you start, rather than moving awareness around the body, you're moving it deeper into the body, right? So it's like so for example, if I'm thinking about the marrow of my bones, that would be like the center. And if I think about the bones, that would be here. Now if I think about the blood, that would be here. If I think of the skin, that would be here. Right? So it's like you're going from like the center to the outside, center to the outside. And you can do that around your body too. So now you've got you've got this structure where you're moving awareness through from the depth to the outside. And then you're also moving it around your body too. And you're dropping this mantra into each particular location in consciousness, right? Now, it's true this is a pretty busy meditation, but if you've got a busy mind, it's good, because what happens is, like, I know that some people try and not think about something, or you try and think about a mantra, but however you want to do it, is what you do is you get like some kind of technology. So the mantras of technology or the techniques of technology, and if you can become focused on that technique, that's the meditation, right? Boom, 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 boom. Which brings me to the concentric sphere meditation. The concentric sphere. So if you're coming in from the center, out a bit, out a bit, out a bit, that's kind of like a concentric. It's like if you think of it as like a sphere which is growing, bump, 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 bump. That's the concentric sphere meditation. This also ties into a little bit into Franz Bardon, who talks about a concept he calls the depth point. And the depth point is how you move into the Akashic realm with any meditational object. You move into its depth point and you can access it from the Akasha. So, yeah, dude. So one of the other things I've been doing lately is there's like a whole bunch of different things converging here, right? There's like different strands of thought and meditation. So I mean, like, some people might think this is crazy, it's not like a program structure, but that's never been my strength, following program structures, My strength has just been finding my own path, but what happens is you're going from the center point, you're coming out. What happens is, you can think of it this way, like, you think of the center point and then out, right? But you see, that seems kind of jittery. It's like dun, 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 right? But that's not, I'm an animator, right? One of the things about animation is making things move beautifully, right? So like, you might start off with movement and all that, but the way you might do it is then you might just radiate it out, right? It would radiate. And then that sphere might have acceleration on it. It might start off fast and then slow down. It would have like elasticity or resistance, right? Like, so the quality of movement of the sphere, right? The quality of movement of the awareness, the beauty of the awareness. And the beauty is really important. Beauty is really important, because wherever there's beauty, there's God, right? So I'm doing this. At the same time, remember the dangerous kriya? Remember the dangerous kriya? Well, for some reason, I was thinking that the dangerous kriya isn't advanced enough. It's cool. It's cool, but I mean, I've been doing this thing where I'm trying to sort of just focus on the body. And just as a test one day, I thought I would just focus awareness, not light. I wasn't going to focus light, but just awareness on the individual organs of the interior of the brain, right? Of the brain, right? So what's funny about this is, there was a time when I was trying to learn how to move energy through my hand. There was a time where I couldn't, or on the foot's even harder. There was a time where I was trying to feel energy in the center toe of my foot, and I couldn't locate it. right? And you're like, I don't even know where that is. And you can't feel it. But when you practice, all of a sudden it becomes easy to feel where it is. And you can start locating energy at the tip of the middle of the toe, the middle toe, right? You just with practice, you learn where you can feel it. The same thing happens with the organs of the body or the brain. Now, before I say this, I caution you to do this. This is widely considered to be very dangerous to do this. So yeah, don't do this. But it's what I'm doing, so I'm just explaining it. Yeah, and the reason it's dangerous is because it can cause instant enlightenment or mental problems, right? Because it's too much for many people. I mean, it's kind of too much for me. I've had a few scary experiences, but generally it's been really cool. So what I was doing at first, and this was sort of happening in parallel to the concentric sphere animation. So they were sort of separate processes, but they sort of converged. So the first one is this. You think about the no, I can't remember the name of it. I've got all these names memorized, and now I'm on video. I can't remember the name. But the first part of the it's not the amygdala. Man, I can't remember. I forgot the name. What is it called? Let me just see. Brain. I don't want to sound like a complete ignoramus here. Not brainly. Brain, man. Hold on a second. Google is acting up. Not rain. Brain. Hold on a second. Because I want to be precise about what the hell I'm doing, right? Here we go. That looks like a good map of the brain. The anatomy of the human brain. Here we go. Okay. Actually, can I move that over here and just show you this to you? Yeah. That's what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on because I can. Let's try it. Boom. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to put on my David Attenborough voice here now, right? As we can see, in the realm of the brain, we're looking at a bunch of named parts of the brain. So I don't do the whole, I kind of do the whole thing. Okay. I usually start the medulla oblongata, right? Just at the bottom where the spine meets the brain, right? And so what I do, well, at first I was just becoming aware of it, right? And then I moved up to the pons, which is the next part. Now, I don't know what all these things do. I did see that, I did look them up, but I can't remember it to recite it all, but they've all got specific functions. Not that matters for the purpose of this meditation. But you start in the medulla oblongata and you just become aware of it. At first, you're just trying to become aware of these things, which seems like it's not possible, but much like the middle toe, you become aware of it. You start being able to identify it with your consciousness is like this perfect tool, which can take on the form of any shape. And so within about 2 or 3 days, you can identify all these parts just by moving your consciousness around, right? So you move up to the pons, then I was moving up to the thalamus, which is in the center, right? That's the eye. That's the one people always say. It's the eye of Horus, right? Yeah. And then the hypothalamus, and then obviously the pituitary gland. Now, what's funny about this is you'd think like the medulla oblongata. Nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about the pons like as a way of like spiritual enlightenment. Focus on the medulla oblongata to become enlightened, right? Nobody talks about that. Nobody talks. I mean, everybody's always talking about the hypothalamus or the pituitary gland, right? Nobody's talking about the parietal lobe, right? Or the pineal gland's a good one, right? The pineal gland, right there at the back. Oh, dude, it's so interesting. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So anyway, so I was working my way up doing this, right? And I was just becoming aware of it. And so I'll tell you something, the thalamus is dangerous to stay focused on. You can, but what happens, it's almost like it's a mirror, it's like a mirror reflecting itself. So when you place awareness on the hypothalamus, it's like placing a mirror when you place consciousness on the thalamus, it's like placing awareness on itself, and it's like an infinite mirror. It doesn't appear as a mirror. It just starts off kind of simply, and it expands almost instantly into pure consciousness. But what happens? Oh yeah, so before I get to that, so I started off just placing awareness on this, and then what happened is I started doing this, the radiation of the spherical, the concentric sphere radiation, right? So I started doing this concentric sphere radiation, and I would do the mantra inside each radiation of the concentric sphere. I would recite the mantra, right? So I'm doing spiritual protection through every organ in my body. I do this all over in the body, not just the brain. I've been doing the liver and the kidneys and everything, right? But it's particularly interesting. It's really interesting everywhere. So I was doing the concentric circle. This was on Saturday night or Friday night. I did this. I'm in the hypothalamus. I just started meditating. It was like 3 minutes earlier, and I just move up. The cool thing about this meditation is it builds your energy level up in about 3 seconds. You go from zero energy to like massive energy. So you're like super powered, like instantly. So I'm doing the meditation and I'm radiating the energy out. And yeah, so I do that and I end up moving into the realms of the Buddhas is what happens. And that happened in about 3 seconds. The whole of reality switched over. Everything became made of gold and the Buddhas were around me. And that was a pretty unique experience. What's interesting about it though is like when you're in that realm, I mean, you think, I mean, it's just ecstatic. It's not even ecstatic. It's beyond physical ecstasy. It's just a different state of consciousness, which is clearly impressive. But what's interesting about that, I'll just change back to me here so that you can see my face. What's interesting about that is the golden realms of the Buddha. What's interesting about that is you can occupy the space. I occupied the space for like an hour and I just sort of stayed in the space. But what was interesting is I started descending out of the space. But the reason I was descending out of the space wasn't because anybody came up to me and said, "Hey, dude, what the hell are you here, man? You better get out of here." Nothing like that happened. What happened is I started getting thoughts. I started thinking again. We're connected. Let's see. Maybe we're going to be lucky and reconnect. Hey, I think we did. Did we reconnect? We reconnected. Yeah. So what happens is you get pulled out of the Buddhic realm by your own energy problems, right? So what that means is that these realms are freely available to anybody who wants to enter them, but one, you might not find it. And to be clear, I wasn't looking for a Buddhic realm of any kind. All I was doing was moving energy, and this just emerged. I've had a couple of experiences though before that happened. The couple of days before that, I was in the thalamus doing the radiation, doing the concentric sphere radiation through the thalamus. And it was pretty clear that this was like really hardcore. Yeah. There seems to be a lot of people talk about the pituitary gland and the what's the other one? The other gland. The other gland, man. What's it called? The pituitary and the pineal gland, right? I always forget the name of them. So everybody talks about that. You never really hear people talking about the thalamus, which is this. I mean, you do. You see that a little bit online. The thalamus is a focus of awareness. Now, again, this is dangerous. This is hardcore meditation, guys. So don't do this unless you're a fucking crazy person, right? It's dangerous because, for example, If I place focus on my finger, I get energy buildup in my finger instantly, right? Now, when I was doing it with the thalamus, I was just becoming aware of it. But once you start doing the pulsing of the spheres, that's an energy. That's an energy thing, right? Dude, so dude, everything's changed. Everything changed in the last 2 weeks with this inner child stuff. Everything has changed. So the thalamus is extremely powerful. Now, I remember reading somewhere about somebody, I think it was Forrest Nits, the same guy with the dangerous kriya. He was talking about when he opened his third eye, he was like, he was focusing and focusing and nothing would work. And then what worked for him was when he realized it wasn't about focus, it was about relax. It was actually going in the other direction, right? So you get the focus, you can focus, then you relax. And so if you can think about going from focus to relax, in a way, that's almost like the acceleration. You could graph this as the acceleration of a sphere, right? Tightness and then relax, right? Tightness and then relax. You could think of it that way too. And so that metaphor is kind of how I came up with the idea for the sphere. It's a metaphoric idea, right? And dude, there's so many ways you can work with this. Anyway, so I've been basically doing things with this region of the brain for the last couple of weeks. But then I was thinking, this is probably getting unbalanced, So, here's a good experience of a dangerous moment, right? So I'm in the thalamus and I'm doing the radiation to spheres, and all of a sudden I clearly make contact with some level of divinity, and it's just like fucking intense illumination, like pouring into the brain, just whoa, like hardcore, like fucking unbelievable flow of brain. And so if you've never had that happen before, you're gonna be scared and end up in the hospital or something. But that happened. I was like, I've got to change the focus. So I move immediately down to the soles of my feet, because the soles of the feet, focusing energy in the soles of your feet just seems to be a good way to go. Now, on the community, I was talking about, sometimes, and I've done this myself, is like you visualize light coming from the crown chakra and you visualize it coming down. I've done that before and I can feel it coming down. I can feel the light. Yeah. There's a difference between visualizing light coming down and light coming down, right? There's a difference, dude. So when I pushed my awareness down to the soles of my feet, this huge funnel of light, but it's not light. It's light, but it's kundalini. So it's divine intelligence. Divine intelligence is funneling through. So it's very different than the feeling of when you're like visualizing light come down to your head, come down to your head, down to your feet. It's a whole different vibe than that, man. It's like divine intelligence saturating your body, and you can, and it's conscious awareness. So you can look at it and it's consciousness. You can see it. It's not like, oh, it's not a visualization. No. It's pure consciousness funneling at its own speed. It's unbelievable, dude. But that's an example of something that might be very dangerous, right? And it's not might be, it's dangerous to do this, right? But really, really cool. But this whole idea of the concentric sphere and the difference between the tightening and the release, the tightening and the release of energy, and that got me thinking a little bit about, because like metaphor, like I always think that metaphor is the language of God. So whenever you get information from metaphors, it's not always, but it can often be a lesson, right? So I posted yesterday, I think it was, or maybe it was today, I can't remember, about the heart jhana, right? The heart jhanas. What's a heart jhana, Scott? Well, the jhanas are states of Buddhist not enlightenment, but Buddhist, let's just call it enlightenment, high states of Buddhist consciousness. And the Buddhist consciousness, you get, the way it works is generally what happens is you focus on something, right? So maybe in my case, I'll focus on the thalamus, right? And then what you might do is you'll focus, it starts feeling really good. So the center of your brain starts feeling really good, right? So you're doing this pulse and it feels really good. But then what you do is you change the meditation. You're no longer thinking about the pulse. You're thinking about how good it feels. And you become focused on the beauty of the feeling, right? And like as you focus on that feeling, that starts growing, and it did it, and then that transforms. It transforms again. So it occurred to me that it might be interesting to try this on the heart chakra. And this seems to be like it works. It opens the heart chakra, is what it does. So if you move into the heart chakra, I put instructions on the community there more or less, but like if you move anywhere down near your chestal area, right, wherever you think the heart chakra is, it doesn't even really matter that much. And then, fuck me, and then you start radiating these spheres of light. Now, when I do it, I do the mantra, right? I'm singing the mantra, and this quickly, like, I mean, it was really surprising. My whole chest just filled up with light, like in seconds. And then, like, because I get so much experience going through the elements and the jhanas, it's just like it just seems obvious. Oh, I'm gonna like move. I'll move into the feeling of light, right? So I'm doing this with light, and then I was like, wait a minute, light is like a spiritual property, right? Light's like it's a property of the higher chakras, right? Probably. And I thought what the heart chakras were known for is the heart chakras are known for love, right? So the idea was instead of thinking about light, think about love. And is it possible to use love in a jhanic way? So you invoke love and then you focus on the feeling of love. So rather than thinking about light and then the fucking like even now talking to you, like it feels orgasmic in my thalamus right now. It's crazy how good it feels, right? So what you do is you go down to the heart chakra and instead of focusing on light and the orgasmic feeling, you focus on love. And then when that becomes big enough, then you move straight into that and you start focusing on the feeling. So you initiate the feeling of love by thinking about somebody you love or a pet or whatever it is, right? Just think about anything which you love, right? And then when the love feeling comes out, then start focusing on the feeling of love. So you're no longer thinking about the person, you're focusing on the feeling. And that transition is a jhanic concept, right? Now, it works in the heart the same as it does with light. So like if you start focusing on the feeling of love, that transforms into divinity pretty quickly. But it's using a different technology. And it's unbelievable. And it just expands out over your whole body. And you're in this field of something which started off, I mean, it's kind of like a joke. You're thinking about your pet, and then all of a sudden you're just filled with this divine love because you were able to pinpoint and refine the sensation into something more. I was going to say more substantive, but actually something less substantive and something more refined, I guess. Um, and so the funny thing about this is that I mean, a good way of doing it, I mean, it depends. But what I've been doing is because it's dangerous to work up in the thalamus, right? But so what I do generally for the last few days is I go up to the thalamus, I do my little sequence up to the medulla, oblongata, la pons, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, or pineal gland, all of them, right? I go through this little cycle, right? And back down, you start again the medulla oblongata, you radiate the spheres up, radiate spheres, right? Then come back down. You do this for about 3 minutes, and there's so much energy coursing through you. And consciousness is already transforming into like uh, pure consciousness. It's moving into a different state. That's when you move down to the heart chakra, right? So it's like you've primed the engine, if you will, right? The engine's been primed. You don't really have to prime the engine, but what happens is once you get into the heart and you start doing this love jhana, is what I'm calling it. I don't even know if that exists, a love jhana, but it's the same technology, right? Come on. This is my one of my cats. There we go. Hi, buddy. How you doing? Um, so you do this love jhana, and this seems to have yeah. The effect this got is as you expand and this moves into this sort of advanced state of consciousness, which is based on love, and love is it's an interesting force, you know. It's not the same as light. It is light, but it's got a different feeling to it, you know. Anyway, what happens is as the heart chakra opens up, what happens is all the condensed light up here in the thalamus floods through your, it breaks right through and starts flooding down into your lower body. And so this really is the descent of light, right? If there's a descent of light, this is what it is, right? That's the descent of real light. It's not a visual. I mean, it starts off with a visualization, but I think the big trick with this is the inner child work, because that inner child work, it just basically simultaneously cut a whole bunch of little sort of elastic bands, just boom, which were containing, which were tethering the ego to the inner child. And then now it just, I mean, this is easy. This is really easy. This is not like a complex meditation. This happens within like 5 minutes, right? You do this, boom, and floods. Now, sometimes it doesn't work. This morning I was really tired this morning, so I was doing it, and it just felt like really constricted energy in the thalamus, you know. And I was like, you know what? Let's just release everything and just go to sleep, you know. Sometimes you just got to take a break, because what's the point, right? And so this is an interesting perspective too. Is like, gee, Scott, what's the point of all this, right? What's the point of doing this? Is to feel these spiritual experiences of light and divinity flowing through you. And how does that relate to non-duality? Because supposedly, like, nothing exists, and concentric spheres would be that would be an object, right? And you're still connected by an elastic band to this imaginary object, and that's all true, you know. But it's a much more rarefied and abstracted thing. And what's interesting about this, though, the really interesting one here is when you work on the heart chakra, when you transform the heart energy into pure love, that is the place where it seems to move into pure non-dual awareness is there, right? That is kind of seems like that where that's happening. That's like it just feels really natural. I'm not saying it can't happen to other places, but just moving out the heart chakra, that is where the natural bond is made to life, as Adyashanti puts it, right? Adyashanti just calls non-duality life, or energy life, right? It's the life untreated by the future or the past. It's just the present moment of life, right? The emergence from nothingness of life. And that seems to, at least experientially, it emerges from here, right? Just like it really, and like if you go up into the higher chakras here and you connect, I must say that when you move into pure consciousness up in the higher chakras here, it's transcendental for sure. But it does feel like a higher spiritual plane. Whereas this, it sort of emerges. It feels more like life. Like, yeah, who knows? Anyway, that's really all I've got for you guys. That's the blurb for today. Using the concentric sphere animation. That's actually what I got to do right now. I got to go animate like some stuff for a client. But using this concentric sphere meditation and really trying to understand why that works, because it's kind of moving from the depth point and radiating out and being playful with the velocity and acceleration of the sphere as it moves out, right? Like a sphere could move out fast, right? Or it could move out slow. Oh, wait, that's fast. They were both fast. A sphere could like expand quickly, or it could expand slowly, right? Or it could start slow and then go fast, right? Or it could start fast and then slow down, right? So you can play with these accelerations. And really why would you do this, right? This all seems like it's imagination, and it is, but there's a couple of reasons why you might want to do this. One is because it engages the monkey mind. And the funny thing is, it's actually playing with energy. It's playfulness, and that playfulness really works. And there's different ways of doing this. So one of the things I was doing too is like today when I realized the thalamus was really like all tight and like just too much energy going through there. So I just loosened everything up. And then what I was doing is I was using two little and this sounds crazy if you've never done it, but like two imaginary, not fingers, like tendrils of energy. And I was just gently stroking from the thalamus down to the medulla oblongata, just gently like relaxing it with like energy and gently. And dude, even talking about this now, I can feel it relaxing in my head, you know? And so this idea of tension and release, right? Tension and release. And that in a way that's a metaphor for acceleration, right? Acceleration is tension and release. Like if you hit the gas in your car, that's tension. When you release it, it's clearly a release, right? So the idea of acceleration, the idea of expansion, the idea of the interior to the exterior, these are all metaphors for the movement of energy. And when you become aware of this movement of energy in various places, and you know, probably the place to start is not your thalamus, right? You can do this in your finger and try it there and see if you can feel anything. Now, at first, you won't feel anything, you know, it'll just feel, but you might feel like, oh, I do feel my finger or something. And just becoming more aware of what that is will help fine tune your awareness. And then with practice, you can get really high definition detailed in focusing your awareness in specific places, even hidden places. And you can move into these things, like you can move into these places to the like the molecular level, right? So you can go from the skin to the bone to the interior organs. Your limit is really your knowledge. That's why it actually helps looking at some of those like illustrations of the brain, because it just sort of guides your monkey mind, if you will, to focus in distinct places. It helps, right? So if you got like a place of focus, and then you can just focus on form, like what is the form of the vertebrae, right? What's the form of the medulla oblongata? And then that form, what is that form, right? And that curious, because then like this, if you want to see aliens, if you want to see aliens, just start contemplating who designed these organs, right? Who could have designed these organs? Yeah, do that when you're energized. See what happens. Okay, thanks for joining me today, you guys. I've really got some work to do, but I did feel the desire to say a few words. So take care. I'll try and get back to you guys. So I'm actually, before I go, I've been working on this VR project like crazy. Had some success with it. Things are going well, but I've got like a month more work, which is why I've not been on here much. I've just got my whole life been taken over by this project. So, but things are going really well. So fingers crossed. Peace out, you guys. Much love.